standards and policy that are in place in SMRG, to look a little bit at leadership in general, talk about what leadership involves, and we're not trying to produce a leadership course here that will take you all through every aspect of leadership, but we just don't have time for that. So what we're going to do is essentially look at the practical aspects of leadership as they relate to what we can do, or what we're asked to do in the field, and what we have time to cover. Talk about some various aspects of leadership, including authority, responsibility, and accountability, different types of leadership styles, and how you can be more effective as a leader using some of those styles in different situations. Then I'll talk about some practical leadership and tools. We'll talk about the field team leadership requirements, the major activities involved in achieving, in going through a mission, the various configurations, what we expect of you as a field team leader. We'll talk about the evaluation process, and we'll have a summary and conclusion at the end. So what we want to do is to give you these requirements and expectations for field team leaders. We want to set that out clearly both in what we're presenting here and examples that you see in the field using our trained FTLs. There's a reason why we set this up, so that only our certified FTLs can be evaluators. We don't use any other people to be evaluators because they've been through this process and they understand what we're trying to get you to do as a team leader. We want you to have a good understanding of what the standards are, and we want to offer you some tools, and they're pretty simple tools. Some of you will be familiar with them already, but I'm going to focus in on them and give you some reasons to start thinking more carefully about the tools you may have already seen. And then I want to give you a very clear understanding of how the evaluation process works. This is a very important part of the field evaluation process, is what happens at the end of your task. Not after you've debriefed the incident staff, but after you sit down and debrief your performance as a team leader. And we'll talk about how that works and what the expectations are for that. We don't want anybody to be embarrassed during the process, but we want everyone to be candid with what they actually did and what they accomplished. So standards and policy. The FTL training standards, the ASRC FTL training standards, talk in three aspects here of actual leadership requirements. Demonstrate the ability to lead a field team competently on multiple different task types, and these references are into the paragraphs in the standards. Demonstrate the ability to properly debrief a field team before a task, properly brief, and then again to debrief a field team. And the implication, not in the FTL standards, but in the search manager standards, is the ability to debrief the incident command staff. And I'll tell you, that's one of the most important aspects of all of this. You've got to be able to do these things to accomplish your task, but ultimately you are the eyes, the ears, and the nose of the search manager in the field. And if you can't convey the information of what you've discovered in the field effectively back to the incident staff, then we've lost the point of being there. So that's why this is really, really important. And I'll tell you, when I learned as an FTL, when I learned the best lesson I ever had was when I was being drilled into by an incident staff member who was actually a member of this group. I'll tell you that story later. So the training policy. What we ask you to do is to lead a field team of emergent volunteers, not your cohort here, people who already kind of know which way to point and how to shuffle along and do a search or whatever task you're doing. But emergent volunteers are people who have potentially no discipline as a team at all. They've never seen each other before. Some of them maybe never been in the wilderness. You'll get all kinds of variances from people who are very competent in the wilderness, who are disciplined, maybe a law enforcement group, to people that just wander up, maybe a mother and her child, who decides they want to help out because there's a missing child and they feel for that person. And maybe there's some of those people who actually shouldn't be in the field. So that's why we would look at this. This is what happens more often than not in the field. You don't get a highly qualified team. You get a fairly qualified team, if at all. So that's why this focus on demonstrating your ability to lead a team of emergent volunteers. Same thing on a rescue task. We then want you to lead a complex rescue requiring the organisation of multiple teams. Typical during a find of some significance is that you're going to have teams, everyone's going to be converging on the missing person. And then we want you to provide that same level of on-job training to emergent volunteers while leading a SAR team. So when you go through the evaluation process, your team members, even though they'll be wearing blue shirts at the time, they will behave obediently. They won't be giving you trouble, per se, but they will not demonstrate anything, any knowledge of search and rescue techniques. All right? So they'll behave like a person walking in off the street, even although they're dressed differently, and they'll probably behave better than most people walking in off the street. And that's really the whole issue is you have to be able to take someone, a raw recruit from the street, an emergent volunteer, and teach them what it is we want to do, what we want them to focus on, and to get them to maintain the discipline you need to get your team to complete its assignment. Any questions? Is that all pretty clear why we're doing those things? It's got a very good sound basis in our based on our mission experience. The evaluation standards will be performed under typical field conditions. Nobody's going to be ragging on you or developing stuff that's unusual or different or trying to tweak you in any way. A lot of people have thought during this process that someone was trying to have a go at them. Not the case. More often than not, things happen. Things go wrong. Very common. And you see people, particularly when we've been doing at the next level up, evaluating incident commanders or search managers, somebody thinks that somebody's doing a whole bunch of stuff to make life harder for them. It's not actually happening at all. That's just life occurring right in front of your eyes. Same thing here. Nobody's working the issue. You'll be assessed by an ASRC certified field team leader or higher. And the whole part of this exercise is it's not just about the FTL candidate. This is an opportunity for everybody to experience what the learning objectives are and what the teaching points are available during this thing. And they may be different depending on what your experience is. But everybody should learn from that. So that's why we don't take off. I mean, if something really seriously bad happened, we'd probably take the FTL candidate aside and out to the woodshed. And generally speaking, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is to get you to be an FTL candidate, not stop you from being one. Okay? And so there's an opportunity there by doing this in the open for everyone to understand what's going on and learn from it, not just the FTL candidate. So that's an important part of this feedback process. Questions on that? Okay. So what is leadership? It's a myth. Leaders are born. How many times have you heard that? Not true at all. This is totally a learned behavior. And I can tell you as one who's got a couple of years on board, I'm still learning how to do this. Many, many years ago, as a military officer, I used to think I was quite a good leader. And I can tell you I wasn't nearly as good as I thought I was, because I didn't understand some basic facts about leadership. We'll go into that a little bit more. Leaders defeat enemies, not necessarily. Leadership is a person. Some have it, some do not. Anyone can have it. Anyone can have it. who has the willingness to learn. Leadership is no more than getting others to do what you want them to do. And I think it's more than that. And it always involves action. I don't necessarily agree with that. So the counter to those are leadership is learned, and trust me, it's a lifelong learning journey. You should never stop learning to be a leader. I haven't. I'm still learning stuff. Slower than I used to, but I'm still learning it. Leaders help others accomplish group goals. It doesn't have to involve an enemy, though you might treat them that way. Anyone can be a leader at any time if that person helps the group get to its goals. And leadership doesn't always have to wear something on your shoulder or your sleeve. It doesn't have to be because you've been appointed the leader or told or given the authority. You can lead. Often the hardest leadership is leading from below. And in some ways, the hardest person you have to lead, you look at in the mirror every day. That's the leadership challenge, is leading yourself. Sometimes leadership involves not taking action, making that decision when it's appropriate to do nothing and let whatever's going to happen, happen. Maybe there's a learning exercise involved in that. So here's a couple of different definitions. The ability to influence, motivate, and enable others to contribute towards the effectiveness and success of the organisation of which they are members. Doing what is necessary to complete a task using the service of others. Harry Truman, 33rd President of the United States. My definition of a leader is a man who can persuade people to do what they don't want to do, or do what they're too lazy to do and like it. I'm not sure I fully agree with that, but that was good for the day. Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. The best leaders are the people who do not notice their existence. The next best people honour and praise. The next best the people fear, and the next the people hate. So they're all different degrees of effectiveness as a leader. And it talks to the idea that as a leader, a really effective leader, you're really empowering other people to be effective and building that team spirit together. The Army Field Manual, US Army Field Manual, leadership is influencing people by providing purpose, direction and motivation while operating to accomplish the mission and improving the organisation. The leader sets the trail for others to follow.
They're on patrol there.
Yes. Penguin Patrol.
Yeah, camouflage.
That's right. So here's some examples of people that we are fairly familiar with. There's a couple of others that I actually like somewhat even more than these guys, and they're less well known, but they've been very, very effective over the years. Do everybody know all these faces?
Dalai Lama.
Dalai Lama,
Kennedy. Jobs.
Churchill.
Mahatma Gandhi. Actually, that was a true name. That was a name that people actually started to give him. What is it you think that made all these folks great leaders?
Well, they're mad, for one
Just kidding.
One last
Watch your back there.
So there's some key components of leadership, some of which you can move around and some of which you can't. By move around, I mean hand to others, delegate. Authority, responsibility, and accountability. Those are key elements of all leadership, either effective or ineffective, depending on how well those things are handled. A leader must possess authority, must assume responsibility and account for his or her actions. And we'll talk about different kinds of authority in a little bit, but the power to influence, command or thought, opinion, behaviour. The right to exercise power to take charge of a group and make enforceable decisions. It may be delegated. And there are three major forms: legitimate, expert and referent. And I'll give you some examples of each. A legitimate form of leadership is obviously someone wearing rank or other accoutrements of authority, and everybody acknowledges, you know, the guy's got 4 stars on his shoulder, therefore he's the boss, he's the leader, he's in charge. So that's legitimate. Expert is, you know, when you are clearly the knowledge expert in a particular field and people refer to you as some sort of a guru, that gives you a certain level of authority. You will be, most likely, the expert on search and rescue when you're leading a field task with real emergent volunteers. Most of the time, most of the people in your team won't know even a quarter of what you know, maybe less. There will be some exceptions to that. Like if you happen to get someone along who's already taken some of the training or maybe has had a lot of experience, the wildlife fishery guys are usually pretty good at this too. And there's other groups of people that might be exceptions to that. For the most part, you'll be the expert. And then a referent style of authority is usually associated with some sort of charismatic behavior, and people just acknowledge you as, you know, the go-to person. As far as responsibility is concerned, you are answerable for whatever happens. There is a corresponding responsibility that comes with authority, and you cannot delegate this. You cannot delegate responsibility. Wherever the buck stops is where it stops, and it cannot move down. Accountability is an obligation or willingness to accept that responsibility. As an FTL, you accept authority and responsibility, and you cannot delegate. You cannot delegate, for example, the responsibility for the team safety. That rests with you. The incident safety rests back up with the incident commander. It doesn't matter if he's got a safety officer or not. It still stays with the incident commander. And on your team, that responsibility stays with you. It cannot be delegated, and you will be held to account in accordance with whatever instructions you've been given when you're a field team leader. So we talked about these different leadership styles. There's authoritative, delegative, and a number of them here that are participative. We'll go through these pretty quickly. I think everybody's familiar with the authoritative style. Do it my way, you do it now, or hit the road kind of style. And there are times in our search and rescue world when it's appropriate to be authoritative. In other words, cut and dried. No, I'm not seeking consensus, I'm not seeking your opinion even. Do it this way. And oftentimes that'll be a safety issue when it's down to that. Consultative. Let's have a discussion and figure out which way we should go. It's not laissez-faire, which is another style we'll talk about in a minute. It's where we discuss what the alternatives are, and then I make a decision. What do you all think is the best way we should attack this, whatever the task is? Boom, 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 boom. Everyone gives their opinion. Okay, it sounds like this is a good idea, let's do that. So that's a consultative style of leadership. Democratic, okay, let's just vote on whether we're going to go up this hill or up that hill. Democratic. Very rarely appropriate in search and rescue. Consensus. The probability of detection was for the task we just completed. Now, that also depends on the level of qualifications of the people that are in the group, and you would take that, you would weight their opinions accordingly. But it's a form of consensus. Laissez-faire. Relax. She'll be right, mate. Don't worry about it. Whatever happens, happen. Not very rarely, if ever, would that be appropriate in search and rescue. You need to maintain some sort of command presence as a team leader. And once you get into this style of leadership, you're essentially washing your hands of it and just letting things happen. That's not how we operate, generally. Delegation. Certainly that's something we do in search and rescue, and as a team leader you'll delegate certain functions to other members of your team depending on their capabilities and willingness to take those on. So these ones here, and I've kind of gone through this already, are examples of each of those styles. Authoritarian, follow me, do this now. And I will tell you right up front that authoritarian, even though it may be the appropriate style for some particular circumstances, with emergent volunteers, that probably won't work because they don't necessarily acknowledge you as an authority. They may after a while, after you've been talking to them and teaching them, but initially if you just say, okay, line up behind me, let's go, you know, and even then, they may wander off.
Any personal example of that?
Yes, I do. I was a team leader down on the North Carolina-Virginia border, and I took out a team of fully emergent volunteers, and we were walking along. We had about 3/4 of a mile to go, maybe a mile to the task area, and I said, okay, let's go down the road. We'll walk down rather than take transport, and while we're walking, I'll tell you what the expectations are, what we want you to do. And we got about halfway down the road, and I turned around and half the team was missing. Half the team was missing. One guy said, had been talking to a couple of other people, they'd been dropping back further and further, and he said, I think the person's in that barn over there, let's just go look in that barn. And he took 3 or 4 people with him, and off he went. So, I mean, I could have chosen, I guess, to rip the guy a new one, but that wasn't going to serve any purpose. So, again, even with an authoritarian approach, it won't always get you what you want. And in some instances, particularly if you've got law enforcement on your team, that will automatically generate resentment, because they probably think you've got no business leading them anyway. Even though they may not know as much as you, they still think because they carry a gun and wear shiny shoes, they should be in charge. Any questions on different styles of leadership? As I mentioned, the FTL may use many styles during a single mission. So what is it, again, I asked the question, what is it that makes an effective leader? What characteristics do you think make an effective leader? This is your chance to tell me.
Someone who's confident. Confident.
Confident? Yep.
More
That's
importantly,
important.
knowledgeable about what's going on.
Tell me why being confident is important.
It's hard to follow somebody and agree with their decisions if they're not sure about them themselves. It's easier if they're on board, they got their head together, and they got a straight, easy plan to follow.
Right.
Follow through, delivering. So
Yep.
completing, making sure that they're not just talking a good talk, that they're actually doing what they say they're going to do.
Right.
Even if it means failing, at least they're trying to really try to, fail by doing it, at the very least.
Okay.
You have to be a good communicator, able to explain
Good communicator. Why?
things. Well, you're so much of this, you're getting adults who are they're grown people to do something that they won't necessarily understand why it has to be done in such a particular way. And so it's not only communicating what you're doing, but a little bit about why you do it that way, and why it's not necessarily the instinctive way, like, you know, I think they're over there, let's go look.
Right. And there's a companion to good communicator. Can anyone think what it is?
Empathy? Empathy?
Listening.
Those are two good ones, yes, but that wasn't the companion I was thinking of. You've got to pick my brains here a little bit. There's a real part of being a communicator and being the leader, and we've actually already talked about it. All right, students, listen in. Here's what I'm going to teach you. A good leader is a great teacher. The better the teacher, the better the leader. And essentially, with a team of immersion volunteers, one of the things you're going to spend a lot of time doing is teaching. And so you have to be good at delivering that message in a way that's suited for the audience. You may not be able to teach your immersion volunteers the way I'm teaching you here, because those people may not be capable of absorbing information in this way. So you have to come at it in a different way. You have to kind of become a little bit of a chameleon and blend yourself into the type of people that are there. Everybody understand that? So, any others? Any other thoughts? Effective, what makes an effective leader? Okay. Let's see. There we go. Here's some effective leadership characters. We talked about these. This is why I said the communicator and teacher go hand in glove. Calm and confident, we got that. Follows directions, that's a real important one. To be a good leader, you also have to be a good follower. Know when it's time to lead and when it's time to follow. If I'm the search manager and I give you a directive that I want you to go to search area A, and you on your own decide to go to search area B, you haven't followed my directions. And in fact, many times, I might have reserved area B for some specific reason, for a different search resource or something like that. So not only have you not done what I wanted you to do, but you may have overturned something else that I was trying to accomplish. So be a good follower. Show initiative. Know when the time is right for you to show initiative, and know when the time is right for you to simply follow the directions. Be a good motivator. Get your people energized. Sometimes that'll be harder than others. People tend to come to these things with an agenda of some sort, and so oftentimes you only need to tweak that just the smallest amount to motivate people. I think we did have this one dedicated to the task and the team and your responsibility, goal-oriented. Make sure you've got priorities of action so that you're concentrating on the things that are going to give you the most effective results. Work well with your people. If you're beating up on the people, they're not going to respond terribly well to that. So you kind of need to encourage them along the way. Make sure you understand their concerns. As you said, be empathetic and listen. Listening's a hard thing. No one teaches us how to listen. I mean, really listen. We hear things all the time. What are most of us doing when we're hearing other people talk?
Waiting for their turn to talk.
Say again?
Waiting for their turn to talk.
Exactly. You're queuing up what you want to say next. So you're not really paying attention. So that's really what empathetic listening is about, is A, active listening, and B, putting yourself in the person's shoes such that they understand that you're being empathetic. Optimistic. Nobody's going to follow the person, okay, let's go out and do this task. I don't really do it. McClellan's up there as search manager. He doesn't know what he's doing. Who's going to follow that? Nobody. Not optimistic. Be a team builder. Lead by example, and hardest of all, remember I said about the hardest person you have to lead, you see in the mirror every morning? Be self-aware. That's a difficult skill to accomplish, but it's an important one for a leader. Questions?
Nope.
Great, you should know this all. Practical leadership. Effective leadership, as I mentioned before, is a lifetime pursuit. And I would tell you, I've probably got a couple of years on most of you, except for Mark. I am still actively pursuing leadership. My personal leadership abilities, and in some cases, by teaching others, I learn something as well. The mission can't wait for us to become Steve Jobs or Winston Churchill. God forbid, we should have Winston Churchill on a search, but I might be able to play him in a pinch. So we have to work with what we've got, and that's what this training is all about, is trying to get you to that. So we're not providing a degree in leadership or an MBA or anything like that. We're just giving you some very, very practical components of leadership for the field. We rely on your personal commitment, your previous experience, and a process development approach, what to do. And so you should have already seen others do this. It's one of the reasons why, as an FTM now, we're requiring you to participate on one of these teams that is being led by an FTL candidate, so that you get the learning experience, the teaching points that come with that approach. And I believe that is fairly unique. I don't believe you'll get that in the state program, that requirement. They just don't have the time. They're trying to generate lots and lots of sausages in a very short period of time. So leadership tools. I mentioned that some of you will already be familiar with these tools, and we're going to take a little deeper dive into these, some of these items. The task assignment form you should all be familiar with. We're going to have a look at that as far as the briefing aspect is concerned, and we'll look at the back side of it as far as debriefing is concerned. And then I'll share my story that I alluded to earlier. We're going to talk about the evaluation, because this is one of the tools by a certified FTL, and we're going to talk about a 360-degree evaluation. And then there's an aid-book memoir that's on the training page of the website. That is up to date. The presentation for this class is not up to date, and it's simply a technical problem that I haven't managed to get through yet. This presentation is actually too big to load up on our server for some unknown reason. I'll probably end up having to split it into two. So those are the kind of tools that we're going to be talking about. We'll go through those in a little bit more detail. So the task assignment form, here, right on this right-hand top corner here is this box, which is enlarged right here. It's a briefing checklist, and it covers much of the same ground as the aid memoir. I encourage you to have a look at it. It's in fairly small print, and most people just blow by it. But if you went through that, and you did nothing but go through that as you're preparing your team for your task, you'd have a 90% solution. And if you want to go to the next level, the aid memoir has all the extra bits and pieces that are not in here. These are the sorts of things you should know before you start talking to your team. If you don't, you're not going to give them an adequate briefing. This is the aid memoir I mentioned. It's actually on the web. It's on downloadable. I think it might be 2 columns, so you can print them out and cut them up. these, I put them up next to each other on this particular slide, just for ease of the presentation. But it goes through map, your task, time, weather, medical kit, transport, communications, team members, group supplies, delegation, briefing your team, and then finally your own confidence. I've updated this. I think the most recent update was in March 2015. Again, there's always an exception that we haven't thought of, perhaps, and that's where your training and experience will come to light. But if you cover everything on this list, you'll have a 99% solution. That's about as good as you want. An extra 1% probably would take you so long that the mission would be over. So this is the debriefing part of it, and now I'll tell my small war story. I was on a search task. I was the FTL, and I went into the mission command post to debrief the incident staff. And the incident staff member was none other than this gentleman right here, Bud Highland. Bud was a very polite and gentleman type of fellow, and he went through this. He grilled me for about a half an hour, easily, just on that one form. And it came to my attention that I didn't have the answers to half the questions he was asking me. And I said to myself, crap, I'm never going to let that happen again. So that was a real eye-opening experience. And Bud did it in a very, very nice, gentle way, but I got the message. Don't come back with half-assed answers, and make sure you understand what this thing is and what these questions are asking for, all these bits and pieces of information. You may not see the relevance straight away, but in the bigger picture, they may come. So for example, what does the wind speed or the wind direction mean to you? Not terribly much, right? But if there are dog tasks going on around the place and they're doing something to indicate either the presence of a human being or something else going on, that might be a critical piece of information in unraveling another clue not on your task. So all of these are there for a reason. So you should think about all these things. Most importantly, so this is just one box right here. If you go down a little further and we start to look at the task results, a good debriefer will ask you not only how much of your task you completed, but how you completed your task. Did you search east to west, north to south, or some other direction, and why? Were there areas of your task that you didn't complete? These are critical pieces of information. And while you may not see the value of it necessarily, I can tell you, and I'll share this with you right now, once I arrive at an incident and I'm getting ready to take over as the search manager, after I've introduced myself to the law enforcement official in charge and convinced him what a brilliant fellow I am and how he should just give me the keys to the city, the next thing I do after I've had a briefing from him is I go through every single one of the task assignment forms because I want first-hand knowledge of what has or has not been done. And I'll go through and I'll look down in this section here about follow-up recommendations that the FTL made, and I'll want to track every single one of those down to make sure we haven't missed something. Bear in mind that this is a gigantic, at the command post level, it's a gigantic communications exercise, and bits get lost all the time. So these things are critical. Now, I can't say that what other people do when they do my job, but I will tell you this is critical information. And I would hope that you get a really good debriefing when you come back from your task. So that means you have to do the complementary thing, excuse me, and debrief your team correctly. So again, these, if you follow this simple form, got a lot of information on it, very, very valuable. these ones here, are very important for me to look at. And I want to see where we went. We've either got a task lined up or someone's gone and searched it. And if he says, clicks in this box right here, high urgency, it should be the next task going out, unless there's something of a higher priority there. I also want to make sure I note any of these things here. Even if they were already noted on the front of the form, I want them confirmed. Yeah, there are holes in the ground that people can fall into. I want to know that, because I don't want to be sending people out there in harm's way without A, knowing what's going on, and B, giving them the necessary resources to deal with those situations. And then, some point in time, we're going to add all the math up, and it doesn't happen on every search. People say we use, some of you have done the MTM course, will be familiar with the tools to assess all these PODs and probabilities of success, etc. And oftentimes we don't use them, but there are times when we do. And particularly when we're getting ready to make a recommendation to suspend a search. I want to go to the law enforcement officer and say, here's what I think is reasonable given what we know about the subject type, the terrain, the conditions, etc., and here's what we've actually done. And more often than not, I'm having the argument with them, I don't think we're in a position where we should stop doing this yet. And sometimes they'll say, okay, I understand, carry on. And other times they'll say, well, that's fine. Thank you very much for your services. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, kind of thing. That's okay. I can then go and know exactly that I've advised him of the conditions in the field and what we've done in terms of prosecuting the mission. So these are very, very important, and they're your tools as well. So I'm going to go quickly. Anyone got any questions about any of that? How many people have really had a real good look at the task assignment form? Good. I encourage you to take them home and go over them with a fine-tooth comb. Field team leadership. We're going to talk about the requirements and expectations for leading ground search and rescue teams. We've identified key areas of the field leadership, which are essentially these three components: the leadership aspect, technical competence to do what you're doing and to lead others, teach others, and safety. Within that, the FTL has three key responsibilities, and we've aligned all our evaluation on these three elements: patient care, team safety, and task completeness. All right, we'll go over those in a little bit more detail. And there's more material on this that I can provide in a Word document for those of you that want to study the full details. These are the basis on which you will be assessed as a field team leader. In the three task stages: preparing, conduct, and conclusion of the task. Under prepare, we'll look at how you coordinate the task assignment with the incident command post, assembling your equipment and personnel, preparing the team, in the field, directing the team and controlling the team. At the conclusion, we want you to debrief the team and the base staff, make sure that recovery of the team, that they're fed, watered, and rested, and then next, the demobilization is done appropriately. So when you see these activities, this matrix shows, and this is available to anybody, again, I'll distribute some notes on this. Probably as a Word document, which isn't quite as large in size. But this is comparing this activity matrix with these three responsibilities of the team leader and identifying each one in relation to which of those responsibilities. This is the conduct phase. And these are each of the activities. When you do the assessment, and the certified FTL assesses you, they'll be looking at every single one of these, and they have a standard which we'll go through in a bit. Yes?
They call them task complete. I get what do you mean by that column specifically? Why is there?
This is how well you completed this activity in relation to task completeness. It's actually completeness. I've knocked it off for keeping
Three
me.
major standards that apply.
Okay, yeah, I got the patient care and the team safety, but I wasn't quite sure what the middle one.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe I should change that to make the slide look prettier. I remove the
Alex,
completeness. Yes.
on the patient care, often, probably even sometimes with emergent volunteers, you may have somebody on your team who is more medically qualified than you are.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, well, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Keep talking and we'll come back to that in a second.
So assuming that you do, I mean, you can delegate the authority to that person that they have the primary responsibility for assuring that care. What's then the relationship when they have more knowledge than you do, but you're still, as the FTL, ultimately accountable for that? How does that work in real life?
So legally speaking, and I'm not a lawyer, but legally speaking, once that person takes control of a patient, then all rules and regulations for the care of patients comes into being, and you can't interrupt that. So that person must continue to provide care, can only be released by someone of equal or higher medical training, or in the event that the person is evacuated to definitive care. Your role still remains as the leader, and your responsibility still is to team safety, completing the task, which is obviously this. Now that you've got a patient, your task becomes to get the patient to definitive care and to keep them alive, and still patient care. You have a responsibility even though you're not medically responsible, and there's a variance there. You still have that responsibility. You're not relieved of that just because you've got an EMTB on the team. You can't just step aside and say, okay, patient care is not my problem anymore. It's still you still have a responsibility. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Hey, Alex. Oh,
Okay, so there is a line here though, when you do supersede your medical. If there's a team safety issue, you basically have to direct the medical to stop and you have to, your priority is your team over the patient. So if the team is in danger, you essentially, you can override the authority of the medical to pull them off. That person may decide not to listen or obey you, but that's on them. But that's what you've got to do. But
stealing from advanced rescue class, the hands on the patient is like one component of the rescue operation. In fact, it's there's probably 5 or 6, 7 other things that are patient care that you're responsible for that you're only delegating a very small slice of that to them. And one good example is like when we're and you guys, a few of you guys were on this when we were during the March exercise. If I was the rescue operation, the ROC, the rescue operations chief, and I did have Ty, who was the doctor. I made him the medic, and he was. But he's like sitting, he's in one spot of the litter, he's paying attention to one thing. I'm standing back and making sure that, are we crossing that log effectively? Because Ty the medic can't see all the time which way is the litter, rolling back and forth or swaying, or there's a lot of stuff like that as the leader, you're standing back and you're making sure that's happening. If I had to stop, I would defer to the medic a lot, but I had to stop the team. Like one time we're trying to get across a log and we were having some issues. I was like, stop. Something that the medic couldn't see, but I could see. And then you have to, because the medic's relying on you to take care of things that he or she can't take care of as well. So.
Okay, I do want to take the opportunity to ping on something that you just mentioned, and that is that it's a highly undesirable situation for you to be the medic at a search and rescue incident. And what happens is, and we've actually had this happen, is you then can no longer focus your attention on your leadership responsibilities towards the team. You must then totally focus on the patient. So even if you were the highest qualified medical person, you might be able to find, you will do better to find a person who is the highest within the remaining resources to take that responsibility. Now, on the other side of that equation, if you don't have that, then you're going to have to relinquish the command of your team to your second in command, who you should have already appointed. That shouldn't be something you do on the fly. It should be something you do during the briefing. And that's really, really important. If you can't maintain your leadership control, command and control of the team, and you cannot if you're become the number one person on the patient, then you've got to find an alternate method to make sure the team is still being properly managed and led. Any questions on that? That's a situation we're going to come into over and over again, particularly when you've got emergent volunteers. Okay,
Alex, I have a question.
yes.
So legally speaking, if you're the most medically qualified and you designate somebody else as medic, it's okay for them to take care of the patient even though you're more medically qualified?
That's fine.
Okay, so long as you're not designated as
Once you
medic.
start treating a patient, you cannot
Right.
hand it off to someone less qualified than you.
Okay.
As far as I know, in Virginia, you're not obliged to treat. There are some states where you are. Again, talked about this. And we've got these numbers, there are 21. There's also a set for rescue, which is slightly different than this. But the idea of this is to give you an example of the activities that you can evaluate against and how they connect to your responsibilities as a team leader. So this is in more detail. I'm not going to go through this. I will send you these notes and you can go through this in detail, read all this, understand it. It's fairly straightforward. All this is doing is racking, stacking stuff that you probably already know. It's putting it into a sequence that says you're going to be evaluated on this. We're going to look at you on a 1, 2, 3 scale. I'll go over that in a minute. Again, the activity numbers here are essentially broken down, same list as before, except now these are the performance standards that you'll be looked at. For example, provide contingency instructions for separation of the team leader. You have to leave the team for some reason or other. Instruct the team on action to take if the team leader becomes unable to lead the team for any reason. That means you're incapable of leading or you are physically not able to be there for a reason. What are some circumstances where that might happen?
Team leader falls down, hits his head.
Yep. What else? Team leader's not injured. What's the circumstance where you may have to leave the team?
Well, you just talked about that the medical situation where for whatever reason you had to take over patient care.
Right, that's a possibility. So the team has to leave the leader. The other way around. Another one. We train to it all the time. Aircraft incident procedure. What does the team leader do? When you arrive at what you perceive to be the boundary of an aircraft incident as delineated by, I don't know, the smell of aviation fuel, burning bushes, a bunch of other things, what does the team leader do? Does he take the whole team into the crash site?
You get your team in a place of safety and proceed forward.
You may be on your own or with an observer, but again, you've separated yourself from the team and potentially some distance away. So that's where you're going to have very clear instructions. this is what's gonna happen now. The second in command will take charge, and we'll proceed on to the, you wait here until I have, or you go ahead and do X. Send 2 people back to mark in a trailhead or something like that, who knows? Maintain accountability of people. The story I was telling before was beyond my imagination that I could lose people walking down a open road, but apparently it's possible. So you have to keep an eye, and bear in mind, unlike our team, who's all wearing blue shirts and look like they belong, folks you're going to have in emergent volunteers are all differently dressed, they're all different shapes, sizes, and what have you, and they have no specific affiliation to us, and so it's going to be difficult. You need to check off every so often to make sure you still know who's there and who's not. You should not be missing anybody for more than 5 minutes. Obviously maintain the accountability of equipment, control of the team, make sure that people are doing what you've asked them to do. They're off searching shoulder to shoulder and you want them doing a sweep search. What are you doing? What is your team doing? What is your team doing when they're shoulder to shoulder marching through the field?
Closed grid search?
They're destroying evidence. And it might be too early in the search for that to happen. Okay? So if you want to do a sweep search, you're essentially going with your bootlaces. I want to be able to see the bootlaces of the person next to me. Make sure it's spacing apart. And they're going all bunched up. They're missing some pieces and probably destroying evidence in others. So you want to make sure you've got control of the team. All of these, again, are fairly clear on the performance standards. As I said, I'll send these out to you. You can go through them, have a look at them, make sure you understand them. You can also receive a copy of the assessment sheet before it gets used. You will definitely get one after it gets used. Then you should receive a written and a verbal briefing, but we'll go into that later on. Any questions on any of this? I know I haven't gone through all the detail here. You can do that on your own. Just want to make sure you understand the structure.
So just, if you haven't seen, some of you have already seen the checklist we use. Essentially, what you're reading is a checklist. It not only has the activity description, but it does have the prompters next to it on what we're specifically kind of looking. So it's not, it might not be 100% all inclusive, but it's pretty close to that. So if you're ever, the idea is, a lot of times it's kind of tense out there, you got a lot of things on your mind. It's generally there to kind of help prompt you, and it's a logical progression of, generally how the activity will go.
So these are our general expectations. We expect the leadership is the same at all levels, whether you're an FTL or not. The major difference between an FTM and an FTL is the FTM is not under obligation to accept the leadership position, whereas the FTL must accept the leadership task. That doesn't mean you have to do everything that you're given. I'll talk about that separately in a minute. But one of the things we ask you to do when you accept an FTL in this group, you actually stand up and declare in front of the group that you will accept tasks as assigned by the appropriate authorities. In this case, it'll be the inside staff. So the FTL is under, that's the obligation you make. I'm ready, willing, and able to do that, and away you go. The base staff, on the other hand, the command post staff, should consider your training level. I can tell you, I doubt that will happen. It should. If you're being field promoted, then theoretically you should be given a task that is a little bit less difficult than a certified FTL. The likelihood of that happening is way, way down. It's essentially most times you're going to find there's 50 people mulling around over here, the sheriff's getting angry, you've got a blue shirt over here, come here. Serious. Now, I've made a little bit of a play of it, but that's really, there's a lot of pressure on the staff and the search manager to keep the ball rolling. And so the likelihood of this happening, this is an ideal situation, obviously. And you want to be able to self-evaluate. Don't take on a task that you think is well beyond your capacity or your abilities, and come back to people and say, look, you know, I know that I'm supposedly ready to do this, this, and the other thing, but I'm not comfortable with this task. And I've actually had FTLs come to me and say, this task is too much for my level at this time. And I respected that, and I said, okay, that's fine, we'll find you another task, I'll assign this to somebody else. Perfectly okay. But you need to do that evaluation. Far better to do that than go stick your neck out doing something that you're really not ready for and doing a face plant.
Alex, do you have examples of things like that where a task that people have said, and this is, you know, I've been trained as an FTL, I've gone through SMRG's process, or something similar?
I was wondering that myself.
Okay, so for reasons that completely escape me, maybe some of you can help me understand. Land navigation seems to be a troublesome area for a lot of people. And in the instances where this has happened on a real mission, the particular instance I'm thinking of, it was a cold, wintry, snowy day, and there was 2 foot of snow on the ground. This was in West Virginia. And the person came to me and said, I don't think I'm comfortable navigating in these conditions. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll find someone who can. Now, I'd much sooner him done that than me have to send another team out to look for him, or even more team. And, you know, I mean, that's your worst case scenario, is we create a missing person inside the mission. That's, I mean, there's no higher embarrassment than that, unless you lose someone, but completely. So that's an instance where that could happen. The other thing is, when it comes to a rescue situation, we do teach you all the bits and pieces of how to do the semi-technical rescues, but it's very obvious to me that there are people who are just not comfortable doing that. And if someone says, hey, I want you to go and set up a 3-to-1, not even worth it. So, beginning FTLs, essentially we're talking about a simple or a less complex task, single team, no more than 10 people, hopefully at least another certified FTM on board, so they've got someone to bounce things off against and can help with them. Reasonably moderate wilderness conditions in the daylight, low to medium probability areas. I don't know whether that has any particular value or not. Again, you want to self-assess and let people know if you think that you're being asked to do something that's beyond your readiness at this particular point in time. And you have the prerogative, and I think this was on the previous slide as well, to discuss and recommend alternative approaches, just because you've been asked to do something. Now, the other side of that equation is you might need to understand that there's a specific reason why you've been asked to hop on your left foot through the search area. Might seem completely ridiculous to you, but there may be, and I'm just making a joke of it, but there may be a really good reason why we want that to happen. There are some funny things that we've asked people to do over the years, particularly when it comes to autistic children. who have specific types of behaviours that we're somehow or other trying to attract them, particularly when they're the kinds of people who will not come out and seek strangers. So we get people to do weird things like twirling pieces of string and making horse sounds and all sorts of stuff like that.
So, can I just comment a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so, those are just guidelines. Generally speaking, that's right. It's not beyond us as SMRG to send you out in the dark, but generally, and the conditions may be a little bit different than in there. But generally, this is what you can, whatever we send out, we know that most of the people that we send out have not passed advanced navigation yet, and you probably haven't had a lot of night. But we do take that into consideration. We consider what are your skills as an FTM that we've taught you, and we do look at the land navigation conditions to ensure that we think, you know, they're not overly complex. So we do, even though it might be dark and whatever, we do take that into consideration. So far, we haven't lost any candidates, so we're pretty confident that we won't lose too many in the future.
Okay, everyone here is coming to the full-scale exercise on the 30th, right? Good job. Good job. Did I see a nod over there too? So, as an experienced FTL, we expect you to be able to search the entire world with the biggest team that you can possibly put in the field. Larger than 10. Honestly, a team larger than 10 is rare. Unless there was an instance not that long ago, it was either a year or 2 years ago, we were searching a couple of counties south of here, and the sheriff said to us, "I want you to put together teams of 100." And we did. We put these tiny, stupid, ridiculous, skinny search areas together that were, you know, about a football field wide, and we stuck 100 people in them with one search and rescue person, and we sent them to the other side of Whoop Whoop that we had no real interest in at all, and it was simply because he had thousands of emergent volunteers. So essentially he was manufacturing tasks. Nevertheless, if you're given those people, actually there were more like 30 people tasks, I apologise, because it was a whole busload going on a single task. But if you are, even if you're given a task which is not real, you still have to be mindful of your responsibilities. You have to complete that task, you have to complete the charade that it is, and we've used charades plenty of times. That's not the only instance. We've often done that in instances where we've found a person status 3, and we give the sheriff time to put his notification system into place before everybody goes berserk. The law enforcement people aren't very good at holding that curtain up, because the first thing they do is turn on their blue lights and go racing out of the command post, and everyone's, oh, something must have happened. But in many instances I've been involved in, we've actually continued searching when we knew what the outcome was already, just to give the family sufficient time to be notified properly by the authorities. And even in all those circumstances, you still have to be mindful of completing the task as it was assigned to you. In other words, continuing the charade, and B, be mindful of the safety. You can still run into problems. One of those instances I'm talking about was down to UVA, and you know, every other person on the emergent search team was all UVA, yeah, was all wrong, tech. Every other person on the team was a professor of this or a professor of something else. So these were really bright people, and they were not going to be taken. And they can pull the wool out of their eyes too easily, I can tell you that. But we took them out. I think we had 3 teams of 10, each with an FTL, and then a super FTL behind all of that. So essentially it was this gigantic sweep task that was running through a plane. We had already figured out the outcome, and it was in the coroner's hands, but the family hadn't been notified, and everyone was connected to the family in this particular instance. They were staff at Tech. So, where are we at? Complicated, high probability rescue task, day or night, all kinds of weather, difficult terrain, density of vegetation, subtleness of terrain, etc., etc. May also consist of only emergent volunteers. This is really the gold standards right here. This is what we're really setting everybody up for. And it's the reality. It's what, I mean, I can't tell you how many searches I've been to where it was me and probably one other blue shirt, and then a gazillion other people who come out from the town. So we just made do as we could. So now any questions about those? Before we get on this, we want to talk about the evaluation process. So this is a repeat. It'll be performed under the typical field conditions. Nobody's messing with you. Everything that happens, if things go wrong, and it will, you will. It's life, and it'll just be allowed to continue on. It'll be an ASRC SMRG FTL or higher. And the reason is because we want someone who's been through this process. It provides feedback and learning for all, and the goal is to build confidence and leadership. I mentioned before, our goal is to get you to FTL, not to stop you from getting there. All right? So these are the evaluation types. There are 3 types. You get a task debriefing. This is when the training ends. This is not your task debriefing itself with the incident staff. That's separate. So in other words, you'll go through the simulation, you'll come back from your task, debrief your team, debrief the incident staff, and then that particular portion of that task is over, and then you'll go into, at the end of the training, that particular portion, you'll go into a task training debriefing. And you'll have a multi-team and single-team debriefing. And the reason we want to do a multi-team debriefing, if you've been involved in a complex incident involving more than one team, it's interesting and it's a learning moment to figure out or to hear what the other teams were doing at the same time as you are churning away on the same problem. So that's why there's this two levels here. And then you'll have an assessment. This is the ASRC SMRG certified FTL will be assessing you. He or she will be using the matrix that we've discussed earlier, and you'll be marked, and I'll go through that a little bit later. You'll be given a verbal and a written debrief. And in the event that something critical didn't go well, then you'll be given the opportunity to improve that area of your performance. And then finally, a 360-degree candidate assessment. I'll go through that in a minute, what that involves. People familiar with 360-degree assessments? It's a look, in an organizational sense, it's a look from above, sideways, and below. So in other words, you get your peers, your superiors, and your subordinates. Ask them, how did I do? And the final piece is the whole mirror up. How did I do? So, the end-to-end evaluation process I mentioned, I've just pretty much described that. FTL candidates are identified. We've gone through the requirements and expectations. You'll complete the field training setting. You'll have a task briefing, the execution and the debriefing, the 2-part evaluation by the evaluator, and then the 360 that we talked about. The marking scheme. This is on every activity. Remember, there were 20 activities we've gone through. You'll be assessed on a 3-point scale. 3 means you satisfy the requirement, 2 means needs improvement, and one means unsatisfactory. In the event that you are anything other than a 3, a written explanation will be provided by the evaluator. If you have something that's unsatisfactory and goes uncorrected, a score of 1 will result in an overall unsatisfactory. In other words, you will not have met the standard. Unless there is a significant impact on the task, unless there's no significant impact. And it's rare that this ever happens, that your task completeness, team safety, or patient care was prejudiced in some way. It's very hard to understand a circumstance. Okay, we don't actually assess whether you organise transport to the task or not, but that's an example. Okay, so you didn't organise transport, people had to walk. Maybe you could have got the task done a little quicker, but you got it done, so no foul. So that, again, we do not assess that. I was just using that as an example. Is everyone clear on that assessment?
Yep.
Okay. 360-degree evaluation. It's the assessment, as I mentioned, up, down, sideways. You'll receive an assessment from your team, from the incident staff, and from yourself. It's not recorded. It's just for your benefit only, and for the team, unless there's a safety or patient care is compromised and not corrected. And that would be recorded normally on your assessment by your FTL evaluator. The purpose of this evaluation is to strengthen you as a candidate, as a leader, and ensure the assessment process a rich learning experience for everybody that participates in it. This is not about taking you out for a public meeting, right? So we ask everybody to be very respectful, collegial in their offering of comments. No personal comments, nothing derogatory, everything should be constructive in nature. It's supposed to be a learning experience, and we all know we don't learn terribly much when we're taking a beating, right? The incident staff will be looking at, did you understand the assignment? Did you complete the assignment? Was your debriefing adequate? Don't be me being debriefed by Bud Harlan. Pretty basic. These are all really pretty standard questions. The team. Were you confident? Did the team accomplish its task as you understood it as a team member? Were there safety concerns? Were they addressed? Did the team leader have good command and control? Would you go with them again? To me, that's the quintessential question. Would you put your life in this person's hands again? Were there things we need to start doing that we didn't do in order to improve our chances of success? Are there things that we did that didn't help us at all and we need to stop doing? And what are those things that we did that were really good and we need to keep doing? Seeking excellence. Self-evaluation, again, same 3 questions. Start off with this one. How did we do? Is this you? Or is this you? Again, same thing. What do I need to start doing? What should I stop doing? And what should I continue doing that I'm already doing in order to ensure success? Okay, any questions about that 360-degree evaluation? Okay, remember it's a learning exercise. We're not trying to pull you apart, we're trying to build you up. Just to summarize, we talked about what leadership is. We gave you some examples of leadership in the context of search and rescue. We talked about authority, responsibility, and accountability. Which of those can be delegated and which cannot?
authority.
Can be
Delegate.
delegated, correct. These two cannot. We talked about the functions of the FTL, and I used the 20 activities associated with a search task. There is another set, a companion set that goes for the rescue task, the essential leadership task. We talked about the standards for leadership and what you're expected, what we expect of you as a team leader, and then 3 tools. What were the 3 tools?
Front of the task, the front side of the task form,
Right?
the checklist, it had a different name, I
A
forget.
memoir,
Yeah,
okay,
and the back of the debriefing side.
right? And since you split the task assignment form into 2, there's a 4th one. The evaluation process is one of the tools of leadership.
You didn't show the checklist, that's why I don't think it stuck in her mind.
So the training tab has all the information except for this briefing, and I'm going to put the briefing up as a Word doc so that you get the information in this presentation. And I'll try and crack the nut on how to load the whole presentation up later on, but I've tried several times to do it and it crashes every single
Quick
time.
question, does that include the actual checklists themselves? I don't recall if we have them up or
The
not.
checklist is up.
There's the 2 of them, one for search and one for,
No, those aren't up.
yeah, that's what I meant.
Right, I'll put those up too. So there's quite a bit to go through on this. So that pretty much is the end of this training. I want to thank you for coming in tonight and for your attention, and as always, for serving to help a missing person. Any final questions or thoughts? So,
Maybe this is a weeds question, but on the question of abandonment of the patient, the case where there's one thing I think I bring up in the pack check or the intro to SAR course is a severe thunderstorm heading your way, and transporting the patient is not going to put you in a safe position. I mean, there's safety things you can do in the middle of the forest to try to be as safe as you can, but at what point, I mean, I thought we were supposed to stay pretty much the patient's part of the team at that point. And the patient, because you alluded to a point where you might have to put the concerns of your team ahead of the patient.
Correct.
Well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, because you don't want to have 5 people hurt versus 1 person hurt. But I'm just I wasn't sure if that could be elaborated upon.
yeah, I'll give you an analogy. How many people have flown by air? Remember when the stewardess gives you the briefing? She says if the mask dropped down from the ceiling and you're sitting next to a child or a person who can't put theirs on, whose mask do you put on first?
Yourself.
Is that it? Is that?
Okay, yeah. Is the term duress, is that like basically, if you're under duress, then at which point
If a reasonable person would consider that you are at risk of injury or losing your life, then it's time to back away.
Okay.
We're all reasonable people, right?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't say it was easy.
I know.
I'm saying there's no absolutes, that's all.
Oh, I know, yeah.
Anything else? This is your chance. This is your chance. How many people in here have done MTM? 2. I guess we need to do something about kicking incident staff training into gear again. Anyway, we'll take that offline. We did have quite an extensive program here at Lunchtime in the AM. Last questions. Did we have a sign-up sheet that made it all the way around?
I don't think so, I haven't signed it. I gotta change these sign-up sheets.
Question for everybody, not to do with this specifically. I used the Sign Up Genius, how many people had a problem